I've just come from my lesson. I've got to play a concert tomorrow and I'm completely unprepared. And you get the feeling where you sort of come out of your lesson. You know you haven't played that well. You know there's a lot you need to work on. And you know you have to play it in concert in front of people with piano tomorrow. And as you walk past the practice rooms, everyone else is playing suddenly starts to sound a little better. Everyone's octaves sound more in tune, the runs sound cleaner, and you just start to think to yourself that everything you play sounds a lot worse. And that's sort of the feeling of being that unprepared for a concert tomorrow. For context, I'm playing the Vinyavsky Polonaise, Opus 21, the second Polonaise. Which for me is hard. Of course, hard varies on who you are. For me, that's a difficult piece. And it doesn't help that there's a large part of the piece that I started learning this week. So that's a week, less than a week to play the concert. Today is Thursday and the concert's on Friday. But despite the fact that I'm not happy with how I'm playing, I think I still deal with it okay. And so I came to sit down and make this video with a few points on how you can go about doing this, because it's something that you're going to face inevitably, because you never really feel fully prepared to play a concert. And I think that's the first thing you have to realize, is that you were never ever fully prepared to play a concert. And so you can always say to yourself, oh yeah, but this time I'm really not prepared. Next time I'll be prepared. And then the next concert comes up and you say, oh, maybe I'm sort of prepared, but I could be more prepared. And the next, you could also be more prepared, and so on. And so you could always be more prepared. And I think it's important first to realize that, of course, there is a level of past which you don't really want to play that piece in public at all. But once it's up to a certain level, once you've had a certain amount of preparation, there has to be a point where you say enough preparation is enough preparation, and you're just ready to go and play. But even then, it can still be very stressful, panic-inducing, I guess, when you're in a situation like this, where you have to play a piece that you know you're not going to play perfectly, that you still have to go and play it. And so the first thing I've written down to play, it's funny, the dot point just says free will. And I think it sounds really weird, really strange thing to bring up in a video about how to prepare for your concert tomorrow. But I think it is important to realize on some level, I mean, you don't have to be too deep with it, but we've got free will. No one's forcing you, holding you down to practice and to play this concert tomorrow. If you really, really wanted, you could sell all your belongings and go and live in a random monastery in the mountains of Thailand. You could, if you want to. You could also, on a smaller, less extreme level, if you were studying some degree, you could quit the degree. There's no reason, there's no one forcing you to continue to study to learn this instrument. On an even smaller scale, no one's forcing you to show up to your lesson. It's next week. No one's forcing you to do any of this. I think it is important to realize, because it gives a purpose to the sort of suffering that we have from all this practice and these concerts, this preparation. It gives a reason to it, because it can be very easy to get blinded by sort of, I've got to play tomorrow. There's so much stuff, there's so much stress, so many lessons, so much practice to do. Nothing's ever good enough. The teachers tell you to practice more and more. And I think to understand that it's your choice to do that, and you make a choice, whether it's a good choice or not, it is up to you that you do this. And then along with that, I think it's a good choice to make, because if you consider, this is getting very deep again, but in the grand scheme of things in the world, in arts in the world that humans have created, this whole tradition of Western classical music, Austro-Germanic centered classical music, which even leads into most of the modern music we have today, that is, without a doubt, some of the greatest art that humans have ever created. Some of those pieces, some of those works, it sounds a bit dramatic, but it really is some of the greatest stuff that's ever been done or accomplished. And I think it's very worthwhile to have a life dedicated towards that. Maybe not fully, maybe not all the time, but it's important to understand that this isn't just about the fact that your teacher said you need to practice more. You do it because it really is something more than that. It really is something great and something worth spending this time on and worth all the sort of sufferings that we have to deal with. And so I think that's the most important thing, to just sort of realize that. Then the next point we have, this gets much more practical, right? It's priorities of what you practice. You cannot perfect the entire thing. And so there has to be a few places where you put your energy, your work, in order to get this piece as good as it can be on a shorter time scale. On a longer time scale, this is where we sort of start to take months to work on only technique. Things like this, or fix a certain bow hold, certain posture. And I think it's really important that we do this more. Not enough people do this. Far too many try to rush into, I want to play this piece, I want to play this piece. How fast? When can I learn the next Paganini Caprice? Can I play it really fast in a week's time? When a Sibelius concerto? Come on, tomorrow, please. And a lot of the time it's well-intentioned, but very poorly executed. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that you can't brute force your way to any of that. There has to be a certain amount of preparation. But we're in the phase now, with the concert tomorrow, that you don't have time for that. You don't have time for those luxuries. And so there are a few things that you have to focus on putting your practice into. The first thing is, of course, the parts of the piece that you feel are the most unfamiliar or the most difficult, right? That's obvious to do. You have to prioritize, you have to go through the piece and write down exact problems that you're facing. Because to say this piece is hard, I haven't prepared it, is one thing. But in all likelihood, there must be, if you break it down enough, there must be bars of the piece, at least, that you are fully comfortable with playing. For example, in this piece, if I just look at the music right now, off the top of my head, I can very confidently, at any moment, play the first 4 bars. You know what I mean? Which isn't much, but then you realize the piece is only made of bars of music, right? And so if you can play the first 4 bars, and then the next 4 bars, and then the next 4 bars, and so on, then eventually you can play the piece. But what happens to a lot of people is that we get overwhelmed and we sort of go, I can't play the piece. But if you just step back and you take a look, you can probably play more of the piece than you think. There's probably a lot of passages that are okay. There's probably just a few places that are a bit rocky. And if you break down those few places that are a bit rocky, maybe it's just a few bars, maybe it's just a few beats, maybe it's just one certain bowing, maybe it's just one shift. And so you sort of break things down And it goes from I can't play the piece, what am I going to do, to, okay, if I can learn these 6 shifts, if I can play the bowing in this section, if I can vibrate more in this melody, and if I can end this phrase like this, then it starts to come together with small bits. And so I've gotten, well, this is my little list. You probably can't read it, but it has the arpeggios in the last page as something to practice. That's maybe 4 bars, 5 bars, no, I think it's 6 of arpeggios that are all the same. That's one thing to practice. Then it has an octave passage at the top of the page, which is 2-3 bars. And so when you break things down like this, it becomes a lot more manageable to actually sort of try to get through this piece. Then after that, of course you want to prioritize the hard bits, that's obvious, but you also want to prioritize the start and the end, which is, there's a name for this in psychology. You have a primacy and recency bias. And essentially, if you draw a curve, a graph, or do you want to draw it mirrored because of the camera? If I draw a graph of your memory of a certain event, or a musical piece in this case, you would see that memory is very high, people's recollection is very high at the start. They remember what happened in the opening, they remember what happened when you come on stage, they remember what happens when you were waiting for the tutti, for the introduction to play, and they remember the first opening section. Then their attention would go down. And this is really interesting, because you think, even if there's something really difficult in here, or this is the most, flashy passage, it doesn't have the highest recall. You have to realize the highest recall by a lot is at the start of the piece, right? And so that's somewhere where you should focus a lot of your energy. You should try, if you've got bits of the piece that are just held together in the middle, it's better to have something just held together in the middle and a really good start than an average start and an average middle, right? It's better to be actually a little bit weaker in the middle of the piece and still have that strength at the start, and then when you come back to the end, you have the recency bias. So it's much better to be stronger at the end of the piece, and it's much better to be stronger at the start of the piece than in the middle. Now, obviously, in an ideal world, you want everything to be perfect, but this is not an ideal world that we live in, especially when you have to play tomorrow and you're really panicked about it. But what you can do is you can really try to polish the start and the end, given the time. The last point we have is health. And this is an interesting one. But we all sort of try to when we get into these more stressful situations, a lot of the time we tend to focus on the situation more. We tend to want to practice a lot more. We tend to want to always think about it a lot more. And so what happens is intuitively we go, okay, maybe we'll skip the workout today, or the run, the walk. Maybe we'll stay and get the extra practice. Maybe we'll skip this meal, or maybe we'll just order this, whatever the hell. Maybe we'll stay up really late to practice. And these seem on the surface like good ideas, but a lot of the time, counterintuitively, we have to say that we need to maintain the health. The more stressful the situation gets, the more you have to practice, the less you know about the piece tomorrow, the more you should be focused on your exercising, your diet, your sleep, because they play a massive, massive impact in how you show up on the day. And when you don't know this piece especially, you want to do everything you can to have a good day that day. You don't want to not know the piece and be playing bad that day. That is worst case scenario. You want to do all you can in terms of practice. You want to do all you can in terms of remembering why we're doing this. That'll help relieve a lot of the stress. But then you really want to focus on these health things. You don't want to neglect them at all. You want to keep them up. Make sure you get a good night's sleep. Make sure maybe you go out, see your friends for a little. This is not to say don't practice at all, right? Or to say, forget about the practice. If you just go to bed, or if you just have some broccoli and go to the gym and then talk to some friends, you'll be fine. No, you won't be fine. You will absolutely not be fine. Just because you do those things. But you will be worse if you don't. You will be worse if you don't. You will play worse than you would otherwise if you neglect these things to focus on just your playing. And so I hope that helps. I've got to get back to practicing. We're building a big community for people who like to talk about topics like this, I guess. Practice, playing, music in general. And so if you check the link in the description, top link should be a school link, SKOOL, and takes you to a page where I have a little video just to talk about the thing we're building. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy the video.